the October meeting of TV Toastmasters, and we have a very good meeting today. I'd like to, first of all, invite Carol up to say something about Russ Noling, who we lost as a member just recently. Carol?
Mr. President and our viewing audience and our members in this studio, Russ, I just met him a year ago at the Institute for Learning and Retirement. He taught a class next to mine on Canada, and I saw his name that he was the Area 56 governor. So I feel like I just got to know him. He joined our TV Toastmasters, and he had his leg removed in March because of bone cancer, and then he passed away this past weekend. So it was a big loss to Toastmasters, and there were a few Toastmasters who went to his funeral service and who the Institute for Learning and Retirement, I'm going, gee, they spoke and Toastmasters didn't. But that's okay. But we do wish, send our condolences to the Russ Noling family, who Russ was from New Zealand, and he did have his sister come from New Zealand. Mr. President.
Thank you, Carol. Well, we'll miss Russ. Everybody who's seen Russ speak knows that he was a very entertaining speaker and a very nice gentleman. I'd like to introduce our Toastmaster for today. She's a competent Toastmaster and a competent leader. She's a member of the Talk Toastmasters of Milford, and she's very involved in politics, and hopefully she will keep this meeting running along smooth and everything will be great. Nellie Bowen. Nellie.
Good morning, fellow Toastmasters and our guests and members of our viewing audience. Our guests today are Claudette and Mitch Coleman from Loveland, and also Tony Brunsman and Nikki Bishop from Kentucky. Nikki, who is operating our camera today, is a freelance television producer and is also a former producer of PM Magazine. My role as Toastmaster is to introduce participants and to keep the meeting flowing. The many roles and responsibilities of the meeting will be explained as we progress. The next role will be handled by Steve Ahrenholz, an advanced Toastmaster bronze competent leader. Steve's role has several parts. As grammarian, he will check our use of words and sentences. As word power, help us increase our vocabulary, and as awe counter, make us aware we must think in silence and not say and or ah. Steve?
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and to our honored guests. As the individual responsible for word power today, I have come up with the word of the day. One of the things I will be looking for as grammarian is the use of our word. I chose menagerie. Menagerie is a noun, and it can refer to a collection of wild animals, especially for exhibition, as you would see with a zoo. It can also mean a varied mixture. My wife is having a garage sale today with a menagerie of items for sale. Madam Toastmaster?
Thank you, Steve, for that descriptive word. Most of us think you only use it in connection with animals, and I wasn't aware of the other use myself. And we will try to use the word today as often as we can to increase our vocabulary. Our joke master, Claudette Coleman, will add a little levity to our meeting. She says it's always important to have a sense of humor. Claudette is secretary of Talk Toastmasters in Milford. Claudette? Thank you, Toastmaster.
The man was thrilled the day his wife brought him a parrot for his birthday. Along with the parrot, she purchased a menagerie of other items that came with this parrot. But one thing that the man did not expect when he received the parrot was that it was older and it had quite a bad attitude. The parrot was very mean and rude to the man, incorrigible. He had a very foul beak. When the man would walk past the parrot's cage, when the man would walk past the parrot's cage, the parrot would squawk at him and dive at him at the cage. The man tried to teach the parrot better manners. He tried to teach him and control his behavior to no avail. One day, the man became so incensed by the parrot's behavior that he grabbed the parrot from the cage, threw it in the freezer, and closed the door on it. The parrot squawked. You could hear things crashing inside the freezer, and then there was silence. Concerned, the man opened the freezer door, and the parrot leapt out of the freezer and onto the man's shoulder. The bird started stroking the man's cheek with his beak and telling the man, "I'm sorry. I apologize for being so mean. I apologize for being so rude. Please forgive me for swearing." The parrot turned to the freezer and began to shudder violently and looked back at the man and asked him one final question. "Could you just explain to me, what the heck did the chicken do to you?"
Thank you, Claudette, for that delightful joke. Now for one of my favorite parts of the meeting, table topics. Table topics teaches us to think quickly and speak effectively about a topic with just a moment's notice. Our Tabletopics Master today will be Ben Davis. Ben is an advanced Toastmaster Gold and competent leader. He is currently serving as Lieutenant Governor of Marketing for District 40. Ben Davis.
As Nellie has told us, Table Topics is the opportunity for our members to get up onto their feet, to come up and speak off the cuff on a question which they have no prior preparation, of course. This broadcast will be going out in the month of October, and October is the month which includes my favorite holiday, Columbus Day. Well, okay, maybe not. One of my favorite holidays is, of course, Halloween. That creepy night when we have a menagerie of ghosts, ghouls, and goblins come creeping out. When vampires, witches, and werewolves stalk the earth. So all of my questions revolve around Halloween. First of all, I would like to ask Joe Schwerling. Joe, what was your favorite Halloween costume? The one that you have worn in the past. Joe Schwerling.
Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and audience guests. Although I can remember a number of years of trying to maximize my menagerie of candy acquisitions by visiting many of the close to 200 houses in my immediate subdivision, I can't remember a specific costume. I suspect it was mostly some types of homemade costumes with a simple mask acquired from a local 5 and dime store, which, for those that aren't aware of, 5 and dime is what used to be able to get things for a nickel or a dime. As the name implies, now the dollar stores have everything for $1 or 10. I can remember some I think animal costumes, you know, maybe like cat, dog, something with spots. Of course, the simplest thing was always, I guess, a white sheet to be a ghost. If I had my opportunity now to maximize the Toastmasters the Halloween opportunities, and with my love of orange, I would get one of these giant orange pumpkin suits that they've got now, and I could also fill it with enormous pockets so I could rake in even more of a menagerie of candy and other things, which I try not to eat too much more of anymore to control my weight. Mr. Tabletopics Master.
I have a two-part question. This is to be shared by Rick Davis and Tony Brunsman. Trick or treat? The historic question asked whenever you knock on the door. Trick or treat? First, I'd like to ask Tony Brunsman to come up and tell us about his favorite trick, either pulled on you or something you pulled on someone else. Please remember, this is being broadcast. Anything that may be incriminating could be used in a court of law. Tony Brunsman, we are not under oath. You can lie if you need to. Tony.
Mr. Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters, yes, my favorite trick. I was probably the essential nice boy. I never had any tricks. But I want to relay to you a trick that was played upon me and my family. It was a dastardly trick, and it affected me throughout my whole life. It occurred when I was probably about 5 years old. I didn't know a whole lot about trick-or-treating at that time. Halloween was this blissful holiday where you went out and you said, trick or treat, and people gave you candy. It was great. But one night, some dastardly people snuck into our garage. I was only a boy of 5 years old, granted. And you know what they did? They took some soap and they rubbed it against all the windshields on my parents' car. And the next day, my brothers and I got up and we saw this. And we couldn't understand it. We had always given out candy. Did we not give out enough candy? Perhaps. And it has affected me to this day. Why did somebody do that? So now as I go out trick-or-treating, I continue to do that. I always carry a bar of soap with me, just in case. Trick or treat.
Thank you, Tony. And now, Rick Davis, what was the best treat you ever received? Rick.
Thank you, Ben. I'm sorry, Mr. Tabletopics Master. Of course, the best treats were always the primo folks in the block, the folks that everybody knew about, that always gave out the full-size Snicker bar, always gave out the full-size Milky Way. This is the size that you could buy in the store. And I don't know how they did it. They were able to afford to give 200 or 300 of these really premium treats out. Those are the folks that you always went to their place first because they might run out or they might turn out their porch light. So you always had to check on them. The people that you hated to go to were the ones that handed out the sticky old popcorn ball. They give you a nickel. They would give you a little booklet. Some people even do horrible things like hand out toothbrushes. You know, how could anybody ever do anything like that on Halloween? But as far as the best treats go, and we try to emulate this today, is to hand out really good candy bars that are pretty good size And our place gets hit because we're right in the middle of a big subdivision. So we have to plan for maybe 250, 300 kids. But we try to do our best and carry on the tradition. Mr. Tabletopics Master.
Well, now I know whose house to start at this year. Thank you, Rick. Carol Kormelink. Christmas has its own version of tales. Of course, The Night Before Christmas is the perennial favorite. What is your favorite Halloween ghost story?
Mr. Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and our most honored guest and viewing audience. I'm glad you asked me that question because I don't remember how the story went, but I do remember the props. My sister had a Halloween party in our basement, and I remember they turned out the lights and they told this very scary story. And I don't know how the story went, but I know for the eyeball, we passed around a peeled grape in the dark. And for the brains, we passed around cold spaghetti for the brains. And I can't remember how the story went, but I never will forget the props. And I wish I could remember the story, but that peeled grape, if you ever want to simulate an eyeball, the peeled grape in the dark passed around is very effective. If you ever want to simulate scattered brains, this cold spaghetti without the sauce is a good example of the scattered brains. So that was one of the scariest stories that I knew back in my youth. Mr. Tabletopics Master.
Nellie Bowen. We've heard Rick's story about the best treats that he loved, but out of everything you receive for Halloween, narrow it down to one. What was your favorite candy?
Well, I don't remember ever going out at Halloween. We always lived out in the country, and so my brothers did a few times, but I didn't. But at church, we had a program one year, and mine goes back to your first question about the costume. Mine was very apropos. I was the cat woman. And anybody that loves cats, like I love cats, and let them rule the house, they sleep with me every night. I do everything they tell me, when they tell me. If they say get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and feed them, I get up at 3 in the morning and feed them. I'm even taking care of a stray one outside. Of course, now we have some possums coming with it and some raccoons. But when the minister called me Catwoman and I won a prize for my costume, I got a candy bar. A whole full-size candy bar. Now, could you imagine get anything better for a prize than a whole candy bar for your costume? But I did like what he called me. I was proud of that, being Catwoman. I wish I had the figure the one did in the movies, though. Thank you.
Mitch Coleman. One of the favorite things I have to do close to Halloween is to flip on AMC or TNT and watch some of the old scary Halloween movies. What is your favorite scary movie?
Mr. Tabletop Master, members, guests. I was really scared of scary movies, so typically I avoided them. I remember my first experience with a scary movie. I must have been 6 years old and grew up in Dayton. And you could take a bus up to the movies. A kid could take a bus for a nickel up to this movie and get in for a quarter. It was pretty incredible in those days. We had such a neighborhood. And then our parents trusted us to do this sort of thing. We went up to the Dayview Theater, where there was this this movie, I'll never forget, Mysterians was called, and it was a Japanese horror movie of the most primitive kind. I mean, you were talking like 1957, 8. Okay, so you can imagine. I mean, just the most obvious. This, you know, if you could get over. I mean, this, from the perspective of today's times, if you could get over the, you know, the obvious technical issues of the problems of what am I trying to get at here? You could get over the special effects, the humor of that, then you could get to the fear. What I'm trying to say is, it wouldn't be. It was really hard to get scared, but when you're 6 or 7, not so hard. When the special effects were so obvious and so bad. Goodness, took more time on that aspect than I intended to. Anyway, this monster was made of metal. It stalked around like, and it had these penetrating laser beam eyes, which would destroy anything on contact, and it was coming to get you. I mean, particularly if you're 7 years old and you're sitting in the audience, it wasn't far away. And I remember the terror of that thing and how it just lingered for days and weeks on end. And even to this day, I shudder to think of this metallic beast coming at me, intent on destroying me.
Thank you for sharing that, Mitch. My favorite first movie was Dracula 1980. Gave me nightmares for weeks. I watched it the other day and fell asleep halfway into the beginning sequence. What changes as time goes by? Claudette Coleman, think back to all your Halloweens and let us know about the strangest thing that has ever happened on October the 31st.
Thank you, Mr. Tabletopics Master. The strangest thing that ever happened to me on October 31st was walking through the desert when I lived in Arizona and collecting candy from the neighborhood. It was a very small neighborhood, and the houses were quite far apart. There was a very unusual animal that came out of the desert bushes when we were walking to one of the houses. We weren't sure what it was, and I was with a friend of mine. She and I were carrying quite a heavy bag of candy. We didn't know whether to drop our candy and run. We weren't quite sure what this thing was that was coming at us in the bushes. We weren't going to give up our night's catch because we had spent a lot of time collecting all of this candy. The bags were quite heavy. We decided not to let go of the bags. We turned toward, we were sure it was an animal. It was very dark night. There was no moon that night. And it was my brother. He was tucked down under the bushes, intent on scaring us. He had gone up the neighborhood street ahead of us and leapt out of the bushes. We actually scared him because we turned on him like a couple of Banshee Indians and screamed at him and chased him away, and we took his candy.
To the victor go the spoils. My final contestant today, Steve Ahrenholz. Steve, money is no object. Only thing you're bound by are the limits of your imagination. What would be the ultimate and ideal Halloween costume?
Thank you, Mr. Tabletopics Master, fellow Toastmasters, and to our honored guests. Money is no object. Ultimate Halloween costume. Well, first of all, this would have to be one of those costumes that would have the molded face piece and head so that you don't have to worry about coming apart at your ears. I think that I would probably want to go for some kind of superhero character, which means you could get the whole body suit. Now, this would have to be for a really chilly Halloween, because I can tell you this would be a toasty suit. But one of those where you would walk into a room full of people that you know, and as long as you didn't say anything, and this costume would have corrective lenses in it so that I didn't have to wear my glasses. No one would know you. Everyone would be guessing, who is that? Who is that? And not have a clue. You could go and listen in on different conversations. The fact that you couldn't say anything would be a little bit of a problem. But since money is no object, I think I would have one of those little devices that modifies your voice. Maybe make it sound like Donald Duck or Elmer Fudd. That way you could even carry on a conversation and no one would know. That would be my choice, Mr. Tabletopics Master.
Bringing new life into the phrase, who was that masked man? Thank you all for indulging me, and to our Halloween audience, boo.
Thank you very much. And now for our next speaker, Stanley Glitchner.
Speaking in public doesn't have to be a death sentence. At Toastmasters, we can help you overcome your fears.
Our first speaker today will be Steve Ahrenholz, who Steve will be presenting a speech from the Humorously Speaking Advanced Manual. He is presenting speech number 5 from the manual. The objectives are to use exaggeration to tell a humorous story, entertain the audience, and to effectively use body language and voice to enhance a story. His speech will be 5 to 7 minutes long, and the title of his speech is Whatever Happened to the Workaday World of the Future? Time 5 to 7 minutes. Steve Ahrenholz.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Fellow Toastmasters, and to our audience, how are you doing this morning? Well, then you didn't work hard enough this week. You should be fried by now. I mean, my question is, why? Why are you doing pretty good? Although you have had an evening to recoup. I'd like to know whatever happened to the workaday world of the future. We would hear about that the workday would get shorter, that people would not put in 40-hour work weeks. Well, I'll tell you, that's for sure true. 40-hour work weeks? I think most of us work more than that. In fact, I've realized that I could use a 40-hour workday, and I still wouldn't have everything done. And we keep hearing about doing more with less. When I first started working for my agency some years ago, one of the people had a sign taped to their desk. I remember it, and I think it's one of these that is timeless. It said, "We the unwilling, led by the unknowing, have done so much for so long with so little. We now attempt the impossible with absolutely nothing. Who can relate to that? At least that's what it sounds like, where we're headed. Another thing that you'd hear about is leisure time. We were going to have all kinds of leisure time. I don't know where that leisure time is. We are in the 21st century. I was thinking about leisure time and where mine goes while I was preparing for this speech. I thought, well, I suppose I could count that 55-minute, 12-mile drive that I have to work one way. And it can be rather entertaining, the way some people drive, even breathtaking. If they decide to have a construction party or someone throws a wreck, you might have some additional entertainment. But I think that's a stretch. And of course, another thing that we always heard about was the efficiency that we would have, the new tools that we would use. Well, I don't know about you, but I have a planner, I have a PDA, and I have a calendar on my workstation, plus my wife keeps a calendar at home on the desk in the kitchen. So that's 4 places that I can have things to do or commitments that I have. Now, who has time to get something in all 4 of these? I'm lucky if I get it into one of them. Truthfully, one of the things they are really good for is if I just totally blow something off and 2-3 days later you've got this nagging thought in the back of your mind. There is something that I've forgotten to do. What is it? I mean, I have a plethora of sources to go back and find out what it was that I blew off. Additionally, some of these things, like the PDA, I was looking at this last night. I really don't use this thing as much as I used to. I had to reset it because it was giving me May 27th as the date. It's September 20th today. It's already lost a day. I'm wondering if that's maybe where my leisure time is going. The other thing is that I managed to crash this with my email. Just think, what did we do with all those hours that we now spend on email? Truthfully, I am expecting any day I will go into my office, boot up my computer, and email will start gushing out of every opening in this computer. I mean, it will be all over the floor, running out the door. I'll have to have some hip waders. So what did we do when we didn't have email? One of the other things that I try to remind myself is that it's often the simple things that are enduring, that help us to cope. And often those things are just as efficient. I have a little jar I keep on my desk. It's a little miracle jar. Problem with it is that when I bought it, it was empty. And it has no refills. I haven't found a place that has refills. The other thing that I do keep in here, rather low tech, but it's one of these things that we've always said if we have more, we'll get a lot done. I have a little round to it. In fact, I have 2 of them. They work about as good as my PDA. I have a sign on the door of my office that I also refer to fairly often. It was a sign that was in a farm implement shop. I commented about how some of the simple things seem to be enduring. This message applies whether you are one of the most high-tech, down-to-the-minute, up-to-date, super efficient people who we all hate, or doing manual labor. It says, we do 3 kinds of work: good, quick, and cheap. Pick 2. If you want it good and quick, it will not be cheap. If you want it good and cheap, it will not be quick. And if you want it good, if you want it cheap and quick, it is not going to be good. Madam Toastmaster?
Thank you, Steve. Now that gives you something to think about.
I'd like to begin tonight with a little joke. This guy, he's a farmer. He's... Hey. Hello? Sorry. But seriously, folks.
Speaking in public is no joke.
Farmer says, doctor says, chicken says...
For help, call Toastmasters, the public speaking support group.
The chicken.
Our next speaker is Rick Davis. Rick is a distinguished Toastmaster. He will be evaluated by Ben Davis, who's no relation. Rick is speaking from the Basic Communication Leadership Manual, speech number 5. Rick is a scientist at NIOSH with a PhD in Treat Your Feet. With a PhD in Treat Your Feet? That's the title of his speech. Because your PhD is in hearing, correct? The objectives are to explore the use of your voice volume, pitch, rate, and quality as assets to your speaking voice to achieve a pleasing, natural tone quality when speaking. His time is 5 to 7 minutes. Rick, treat your feet. Rick Davis.
Thanks, Nellie. That's entirely my problem. I filled in the wrong space. Napoleon said, "An army travels on its stomach." I would like to disagree. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, guests, and our studio audience. Anyone who's suffered foot pain knows that an army travels on its feet. And if your feet aren't in any kind of situation to travel, you don't go very far. I didn't realize it, but I'm a long-term foot pain sufferer. I've been suffering foot pain probably since when I was in grade school. I was the kid that hated to run, hated to walk any great distances. I didn't mind other things. I used to enjoy lifting weights and doing all these other physical things. But as far as walking or running came, I did not care for that at all. Later, when I became a scout leader, I was the one that always was trying to talk the scouts out of the 20-mile walk, the long-distance bicycling, and those sorts of things. But it all came to a head a few years ago when, what's happened is my feet have gotten progressively worse. Last couple of years, I belonged to a outfit called the Commissioned Corps Readiness Force, and they began enforcing physical standards. And I could do all the push-ups and sit-ups and all the things that they required, but they required a 1.5 mile run. And what I was finding is, as I was getting ready to train to do this 1.5 mile run, that my feet just were killing me. I was just not able to accomplish this, and I would have to stop in order to get my feet from stop hurting. And finally, one day when I was visiting my doctor for another problem, I forget what, I mentioned to him that I was having foot pain. And he said, "Well, you have a bunion. That's why you should be having foot pain." So I decided, in order to accomplish this physical requirement that was required for the Commissioned Corps Readiness Force, that I would have this bunion operated on. This required some planning. The person who does this only does it once a month, and so I had to fit into his schedule. And I had another opportunity. I had an opportunity to go to England in July, so I didn't want to be. I want to be able to travel on my feet. So I put it off, and finally September, 2.5 weeks ago, I had my bunion operated on. Now, anyone who's ever had a foot operation knows that the first thing you're not allowed to do is to put any weight on that foot for 2 weeks, which is very interesting. You can't go to work because they don't want you. There's any opportunity that you can put any kind of weight on that foot at all. They actually go in and cut the bones, and so they have to be rejoined. And the bunion, when I looked at the X-ray, it has a wire going right through the middle of it. It's very interesting. So it's sort of wired together until everything heals. So I was not able to put any weight on this, and the easiest way, of course, to avoid putting weight on it is to be flat on your back, which is not something that I recommend to anyone, although in this situation it was about the only thing I could do. I thought, well, I'll get a lot of reading done. No, reading did not get done. I was able to read the newspaper every day, but I spent a lot of time watching daytime TV, and let me tell you, daytime TV is the worst. You also find out about your family. They do little things to sabotage you. They leave the wireless phone on the other side of the house. So by the time you get there, the answering machine's picked up on it, or the person is hung up and gone on to other things. They leave shoes laying in the middle of the floor, all these other things that are really nice. The one thing that I can say, and this is, I know Nellie will enjoy, is that I developed a much stronger relationship with my cat, because as I was laying there, my cat was laying on top of me. So for 2.5 weeks, or for 2 weeks, our little kitty used me as her bed. So that worked out well. Let me just say that all kidding aside, that I think that this is going to be a very positive thing. It's one of these things where you put in a certain amount of effort and you're going to get a lot more out of it. I think that anyone who has foot problems knows that it's not a lot of fun. If your feet hurt often, if they hurt when you're walking, and especially if you're only walking very short distances, you should have your health professional check it out, because it could be something very simple. It could be a matter of readjusting the way your foot strikes the ground, or it could be something very involved, like having your bunion removed, something like that. But have your health professional check and make sure that it isn't something serious, because you need to treat your feet right.
Thank you, Rick, for a very informative speech and for giving us some sage advice along with it. Toastmasters activities help people overcome the fear of public speaking, and that is considered the #1 fear of a lot of people, even more than their fear of death itself. Join Toastmasters and we'll teach you it can be fun.
All the education in the world won't help you get ahead in life if you can't express your ideas effectively. Every day, competition for advancement gets tougher and tougher. You need an edge. A Toastmasters Club can give you that edge. A low-cost learning experience for men and women. Toastmasters gives you the confidence to express your ideas to anyone. Get the Toastmasters edge.
A general evaluator, Carol Kormelink, today directs the educational training. Carol is an Advanced Toastmasters Silver and Advanced Leader. She is also Loop Division Governor and Treasurer of Talk Toastmasters in Milford. Carol will explain her general evaluator role more thoroughly as she chairs the next portion of the meeting. Carol Kormelink.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and our most honored guest. As the general evaluator, I did want to cover the Toastmasters mission statement. The mission of a Toastmaster is to provide a mutually supportive and positive learning environment in which every member has the opportunity to develop communication and leadership skills, which in turn fosters self-confidence and personal growth. During the evaluation, as general evaluator, I will evaluate the meeting after the evaluators have evaluated the speakers. And my team, we have the grammarian is on the team of evaluation and our timer. To start off with, we will have the evaluator for Steve's humorous speech number 5, Joe Swirling. Joe Swirling has just recently retired, and as every one of the Toastmasters know, orange is Joe's favorite color, very appropriate for Halloween. Mr. Joe Swirling.
Thank you, Madam General Evaluator, Toastmasters, guests, and audience, and especially Steve. This is the number 5 speech in the Humorously Speaking Advanced Manual. And that's one of those that you can select as you pass the first 10 speeches in the initial communication and leadership manual with Toastmasters. Whatever happened to the workaday world of the future? although it was quite a lengthy title, it definitely explains and gives a hint of the types of what the content of the speech was going to be. I think the organization of your speech was quite appropriate. Everything was tied together on the types of time constraints and devices and various other, in a humorous way, aspects of all these time-consuming and the lack of time in everyone's workaday world. I think your use of, and particularly in this case, a lot of exaggerated gestures were quite appropriate. The various linkages and the content of your speech, the office poster that you referenced, the examples, the poster that your coworker had, your miracle jar, your visual aids, the planner and the PDA. One suggestion I might have was that in referencing a couple of those, like the PDA and then the round to it's, you might have elaborated a little bit more on PDA for those that aren't specifically, and just more generally, and maybe in a humorous way, refer to those electronic planning devices and their. I think that could open up a good inroad into some humor as to how they operate as well. And then, even though you referred to and showed the round to it, I think if you concluded with your reference to that as the whole phrase of "I'll do that when I get around to it," would help clarify that to the audience that might not have caught on to the fact that those little words "to it" in a round disc were meant to convey. I also like the parts of near the end of your speech where you had the trio of the ways to get things done: good, quick, and cheap, and the explanation of the pairs and what the result is. Beyond that, I think one final suggestion would be maybe instead of making that the ending, maybe an exaggerated humorous statement separate from that would also tie back to the title or the overall content, rather than just leaving the third of those three items as being the ending. It was humorous in itself, but I think letting those stand alone and then come back with a humorous summary ending would add even more impact to your presentation. And I'm sure we all enjoy this and future presentations, especially those humorous ones. Thank you, Steve. Carol.
Thank you, Joe Schwerling. One of the things that evaluator is important to the person is because that helps them to improve their speaking. So if Steve were to give this speech again, it would help to clarify it in Joe's mind if he would do that. And I also do not know what a PDA is, so that was good. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Our next evaluator has already been introduced, Ben Davis. He will be evaluating Rick's speech, and I'd like to welcome Ben Davis to the lectern.
Fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guests, and especially Rick. Rick, your presentation treat your feet. You told me before you began that you weren't really going to be working on a great deal of vocal variety, so I'll leave that aside at this point. Just talk in general about your presentation. First of all, I liked your opening. I always enjoy somebody quoting Napoleon in such an effective manner, bringing it out. An army always travels on its stomach. I disagree. Really did offer your audience a chance to laugh with you there at the beginning before getting into the meat of your speech, and it did give you something to really stick a toe in to your topic. Thank you. Warning ahead of time, this is going to be one of my suggestions for you. Puns seem quite fitting for this one. I believe you had a logical progression in your speech. You first of all defined the history of the problem. You talked about the resolution of your personal problem, and then you went on into an admonition to the rest of us to be cautious in our own steps in dealing with the problem, finding out what's going on here. Some suggestions for you. First of all, you did have a couple of verbal missteps, as I was calling them. For example, you said physical requirement that was required at one point, which just struck me as being odd. The other thing, and I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, this speech is an excellent opportunity for more humor. Yes, you can walk this whole foot thing into the ground if you'd like, but still, the opportunities are here. For example, just think about the use of the phrases, well, I really put my foot in at that time, or perhaps saying, well, I turned out to be a victim of foot and mouth disease. Adding this in here, it does help to add a running theme, adds a lot more humor without detracting from the seriousness of your message. You are your message at this point. Seeing you hobbling around on the walker there, instead of standing up and striding confidently as we normally do, does help deliver your point. And this would help us, I think, to accept it a little bit more easily. For example, the one thing that I will say here, you ended, your last line was, if you don't have mobility, life isn't a lot of fun. How about changing that around and alluding back to your beginning by saying, without feet, no matter what Napoleon says, you'll be going nowhere fast. Something along those lines, which really does help to tie it back together with the original theme. Rick, I enjoyed it. I'm sure that you look forward to being more mobile as time goes on, and I appreciate, as always, the opportunity to evaluate you. Madam General Evaluator.
Thank you, Ben, and I'll make some more comments on your evaluation after.
I would like to thank all of you here today. Your cooperation and participation has made this a delightful meeting. And to our television audience, thank you for your interest in Toastmasters. I will now return control of the meeting over to our president, Rick Davis.
Thank you, Nellie. Nice job, Nellie. Thanks. All right, I want to remind everyone that the next meeting of the TV Toastmasters is at the Kenwood Church on October 7th. It's at 5 p.m., right? 6:30. I've got that down. 7 p.m.
No, wait a minute, it's at 6:30 p.m.
6:30. And then the meeting after that, the meeting back here at the cable station, is October 26th. We changed that because there are going to be a number of people tied up in Toastmaster-related items. I want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank the viewing audience for tuning in, and we will see you next time.